There we go. Can toxic masculinity be used as an educational tool? When we use the term toxic, we discuss something that ultimately only can harm someone. We refer, or we think, of the carcinogenic fumes that ultimately destroy our beloved planet. We think of the misinformed assumptions or otherwise ideals of the upper classes that only stand as a detriment to diminish and destroy the attempts of the lowest classes below. Or we think of the misinterpreted forms of expression from select individuals within our society that attempt to destroy intelligent and innocent conversation. My name is Vernon, and welcome to my TEDx. Now, can I get a show of hands? Who of you have ever felt like you've been unable to express your feelings? Now, hold your hands up if you felt that you didn't have equal right to express your strength, independence, leadership qualities, and courage. Now, imagine a person to whom has had to hold their hand up every single time, who has been stuck in such a conundrum that they struggle to express themselves. You see, I'm from a little town called Sanderstead, within the Greater Borough of London of Croydon. In London, we're often thought of as an anomaly, hosting our own separate postcode, the little CRO compared to the standard SE2. We are considered an active other. See, I note this primarily because it's crucial in understanding. Interpretation, rather than perspective, is key in assessing and ultimately understanding particular behaviors. Now, in layman's terms, the short-sighted will never be able to see the unfamiliar unless they change their lenses. Now, in my house, I'd come to understand something very, very key. It was a foundational understanding in a sense. It was that respect encompassed everything. It taught us that if you ever stand against someone else, you must damn well be able to stand on both feet. We, in my house, believe it as a conflictual type of honor. Now, this was something that my brothers very well knew. They knew that sometimes the world is going to attempt to, step on you. And sometimes you need to be able just to at least punch back sometimes. It wasn't that we believe that everything should be handled in an altercation, but simply that you need to be able to show that if there's teeth involved, that you have teeth too. Now, I was no older than about 12 years old when I had begun my secondary school. At my secondary school, a very common theme that many of you may know is a game called Scramble. I can hear the laughter. Now, Scramble in my school, it wasn't something of a revolutionary understanding. It was one of the older kids attempting to assert their dominance on the playground by, well, quite simply, taking about 10 pence up to about £2, throwing it into a circle of about 30 odd girls and boys. Now, when I tell you what ensued next was barbaric in nature. The all-out brawl turned straight-A students into street fighters. Many were hospitalized. Why? Not because they had sat and thought what the exchange of fists could ultimately achieve, but instead, they chose to act impulsively. They acted upon the simple desire to be the top of the food chain, to be admired by the bigger kids. See, that in itself can teach many a thing. What it taught me was something a bit more progressional. By the age of 15, 6'1", and in the By the age of 15, 6'1", and with such an ambition to be better than others, I stood in front of my peers. I understood that if I ever was able to breathe, to exist, or even to be independent, I'd need to know two very crucial elements: how to be able to resist as an independent individual, but also how to stand on my own. I wanted to be better than what I was. I wanted to be able to assert my dominance. I wanted it to be acknowledged as really a man within this world often does. Now, you might be asking yourself, what does this personal story about myself teach you? It can often teach you something very often overlooked. It can teach you that everyone has insecurities. Now, these insecurities, at least at that time, within the environment of the school, taught me something a bit more substantive. Now, the educational institutions that you may send a lot of your children to can teach you a few things academically, can teach you how to get some grades, but what it taught me, especially then, wasn't how to get the grades, it wasn't how to gain social peers. It was either how to fight or how to fall. Simply put, the idea that we'd throw away all terms of reality and sanity simply to be able to be the top of the hierarchy was all that made sense to me at that time. Now, I'd like to tell you that my masculinity then stopped and it became less toxic as I got older, but I'd be lying. Honestly, I stand here now having in full acknowledgement that I have chiseled away at the many years that I have believed my expectations and my ideals could exist in. I believe that I have learned or am actively attempting to learn from the actions of my past. See, I was about no more than 13 years old. Wow, I was about 13 years old. Let me just take this moment to simply say, this story ultimately disgusted me. Why? Because on this particular day, and I know she's standing in the audience, I'd like to say sorry for this, I had said something so grotesque to my mother. I told my mother that I hated her. Not because she had done anything of any discourse that justified my disarray, but because she wouldn't buy me an item that day. See, my mother, she was and is, an economically savvy woman. She ultimately would go into a retail store and refuse to pay full price. Why? Because she knew where to get it out at some another time. She tolerated my attempts of assertiveness. See, what I want to be taken away from this story of how my mother existed as a supernatural character throughout my childhood, it isn't that, yes, kids can be ignorant and they can be unintelligent and they can ultimately be spoiled, but it's more that you're able to learn from what's already gone on. Yes, I'm saying every single one of you in this room are able to learn from the actions of yesterday, the day before, and potentially the month even before that. It was Freud that stated only through a renunciation of our more selfish drives are we able to be able-bodied citizens of society. Toxic masculinity, in my personal opinion, is a method of control. It's a method to which you control every single situation at the expense of everyone else around you. Now, you might be asking a further question of exactly what can this teach us? The behavior that ultimately only aims to benefit one individual by disadvantaging another? It can teach you that if you are willing to open up to the insecurities, or at least the possibility that you aren't invincible, you can then be stronger in mind and body. I believe it's irrespective of gender, be you big or you small. I believe that these insecurities can ultimately teach you that yes, you are who you are, but you can be someone so much better. I believe that this societal whisper that tells you at the back of your mind, maybe just don't mention that. I believe if you potentially were able to put aside the feelings of, I'm going to do this and I must do that, then you could also achieve such higher escapes. I believe that toxic masculinity is the uncensored, unsolicited, otherwise uninhibited expression of vulnerability throughout society, but yeah, I'll be fair, it's often poorly articulated, poorly orchestrated, but again, at the end of the day, it does stand as a form of expression of someone's emotions. Tell me, who are we to disregard this expression, irrespective of how damning, how intimidating, and how generally upsetting it is to hear? See, we tend to think that masculinity, or at least understanding one another, is similar to that of a Christmas present on, Christmas Eve. Beautifully wrapped with the ideals of equality and expectations that are only and wholly understandable. A matter of fact, toxic masculinity is so grotesque, it's very often simply regarded in the ideals of cancel culture. If something is toxic, it's much easier just to go, okay, yeah, no, bye-bye, instead of ever attempt to analyze or assess what's being said. See, I believe vulnerabilities coupled with their insecurities can teach not only you, not only your brother, not only your sister, how to potentially interact with a series of different situations, but I believe it also can teach you how people want to be interacted with. See, in the former segment, I had made clear what is necessary to eventually be a whole individual must first again be weak, to then inevitably gain in strength. You must be able to appreciate your vulnerabilities as a person to whom it does hear that whisper, but chooses to evaluate and move past what is being said. I believe that through simple conversations and understanding particular interactions, we can gain a different standing and a different standpoint. Now, that all sounds abstract and lovely in sense, but I'd like to say how particularly it touched me. See, I grew to understand insecurities not through the abstract sense of reading a book. I grew to understand insecurities through my interactions with my father. Now, like any human, my father is a sensitive, or at least was and is a sensitive person. See, I didn't realize it at first. I ultimately thought if your parent was standing over you with a quivering hand shaking with adrenaline, they know what they're doing. I thought at that time, if I was ever the lower situation, the lower entity, I must understand. But can I ask you, if the child is now asking you to your statement of please do not do that, they respond with a why. How then is the proper punishment or proper understanding being transgressed? Or is it simply another action of toxic behavior? I'll be completely honest here. I have done many a thing through my life that have justified the many a discipline I've received. However, I understood, particularly with my father, what was most severe, at least in his words, was a direct disregard of his word. Now, a direct disregard of his word, yeah, that would result in an altercation. Something similar to that of a Shakespearean tragedy. It simply wouldn't make sense. It was logical in thought, but in operation, it was very often bizarre. It was simply because of his passionate discourse, his, I would do this, why? Because I am here and you must listen to what I am saying, that I would often do what he was saying. Not because I understood, but because it's better to act like I understood or otherwise adhere to his desires at that time than ever go against it. See, I think what doesn't necessarily matter as much in this particular conversation is something really that should. The idea of discipline and conflict within households isn't a new one. Within education, again, it's not a surprise. The traditions of brutality within the home and outside the home is very much a norm, to the point I have not seen a single person frown. We have kind of grown to a state that, as an Afro-Caribbean male, I've grown to expect a certain amount of hostility. In my own opinion, and I'd like to hope by yours too, toxic masculinity is simply a poorly articulated blind man's message. They attempt to say, or rather I attempt to say, so many things that ultimately you might not ever be able to understand, but you'll listen attentively simply because I stand here with poise and power. I believe, or rather I was taught, that in my household to ever have a word or ever have an independent opinion, you must first be independent. You must be exclusive. You must be able to pay your bills. You must not be dependent upon someone else, or at least something else. So, taking that in account, I would like to say something that ultimately will embody me with a profound level of strength. I'd like to say something here that has never been said before. I am bisexual. That 3-word phrase, do you see the smile on my face and the lack of tears in my eyes, the accomplishment and passion it gives me to be embodied as an individual that no longer needs to hide? A transformation has gone forth on the stage. Why? Because I now no longer can say that I am hidden behind a veil of deceit and understanding. Why? Because you can see me. You can either choose to accept me as I am or reject me as I stand. But you, yes, you will be able to acknowledge that today I have said something that I am proud of. I have been able to embellish upon my most sensitive aspect. I've been honest and accepting of who and what I am. It was bell hooks that ultimately taught us in 2004 that it is only through an appreciation of your more sensitive or otherwise more concealed attributes that we are able to understand our feminine masculinity. We are able to accommodate the more quiet notions, let's say. I am what I stand to be. At the beginning of this conversation, was weak. I stood here as nothing more than a person with a few sheets of paper. I now stand here as a person to whom, regardless of the outcome, has gained power. I would like to hope that every instance of toxic behavior and every individual that has ever thought to be toxic can stand, maybe not necessarily next to me, but in accomplishment or acknowledgement that their actions do have a reaction. I will work to communicate why my feelings and my emotions can ever influence my action. And I can only hope a toxic individual will do the same. That way, establishing that their weaknesses, or rather their vulnerabilities, will not dictate their action or influences in the future. Stripping away their archaic mind and their once most dependent desires, I believe we can move into a place where it's safe to say, I am who I want to be. Now, let me take the words of the founding father of revolutionary theory as one of our closing lines. Men make their own history. Why not make yours? At the very least, why not make yours in full acknowledgement of your own and your peers' feelings? Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, and I hope you have a wonderful day.